Ethan Carter was in a foul mood that he sat in the enormous black leather chair in his corner office on the top floor. The computer screen in front of him blazed an aggressive blue that the corporate security system had detected an external intrusion. The firewall alarm had gone off 3 times before he finally silenced it. The tech team swarmed around the servers, sweat beading on their foreheads. The lead engineer approached him, pale-faced. Mr. Carter. The intruder bypassed the triple encryption and pinpointed your personal terminal directly, and that Ethan's voice was cold enough to freeze water. They didn't steal any data, just opened one folder, browsed for 3 minutes, then logged out. That Ethan's brow furrowed. His personal terminal contained 5 years' worth of core trade secrets and strategic blueprints for Carter Holdings. Someone had broken through layers of security just to look at a single folder for 3 minutes. It didn't add up. He rose and walked to the central command console, staring at the traced IP address. Where is this address? East Side. Cedar Lane. Apartment 7B. Building 3. The engineer stammered. It's a residential IP. We suspect the intruder used a proxy that might not be the real location. Ethan was already reaching for his coat. Get the car ready. I'm going myself. He didn't know why he insisted on going personally. He could have handed it off to the cybersecurity division, or simply called the police. But there was something about that 3-minute window, that the fact that nothing was stolen, that unsettled him on a level he couldn't explain. As he settled into the back seat of the town car, his fingers drummed restlessly against his knee. A strange feeling gnawed at him, like something had shifted in his life without his knowledge. The car pulled up to the aging apartment complex on Cedar Lane as dusk settled. No elevator, just creaking stairs. Ethan took them 2 at a time, followed by 2 security detail and 1 technician. He stopped in front of 7B and knocked 3 times. A rustling noise came from inside, like a small child running. Then the door cracked open, just wide enough to reveal half a face. Ethan looked down. A boy about 4 or 5 years old stood in the doorway, craning his neck up to stare at him. He wore blue and white striped pajamas, his hair slightly mussed. His features were exquisite. Large dark eyes, a straight nose, defined lips. That face. Ethan's breath stopped in his throat. He stared at the child, and a wire that had been pulled taut for 5 years snapped in his head. That face was too familiar. He saw it every morning when he shaved. The same sharp jawline, the same dark eyes, the same angular brows. In 33 years of life, Ethan had never felt a chill of recognition like this. Not from anyone except his own reflection. You're Ethan Carter, the boy said. His voice was crisp and calm, with the measured tone of a small negotiator. I figured you'd come. Ethan's throat moved. He crouched down to the boy's level. What's your name? Ethan Jr. The boy paused. But everyone calls me EJ. Ethan's heart seized when he heard the first name. Before he could speak again, a small head peeked out from behind the boy's back. A girl with 2 tiny pigtails and a pink nightgown clung to her brother's shoulder. She stared at the man in the doorway with wide, round eyes. Then she whispered, soft and hesitant, Daddy. Ethan froze. The little girl seemed to interpret his silence as displeasure. Her lower lip wobbled, and she shrank back behind her brother. EJ shifted, blocking his sister from view. He looked up at Ethan with that same unsettlingly mature expression. Who are you? Ethan's voice came out rough. He searched the boy's dark eyes. Who's your father? EJ paused. His expression flickered. Complex, weighing something. Before he could answer, a woman's voice drifted from inside the apartment. EJ. Evie. Who's at the door? Why aren't you letting them in? A young woman appeared from the back room, wearing a white knit sweater and a light green apron. She carried a ceramic bowl of sliced fruit. Her eyes landed on the tall, half-crouched man in the doorway. The bowl slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor, fruit scattered across the linoleum. Nora stood frozen amid the mess, all color draining from her face. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She stared at the man crouched outside her door, at the man who hadn't changed much in 5 years. Still sharp, cold, powerful, like a mountain she'd spent years trying not to look back at. Ethan slowly rose to his full height. His gaze moved from EJ's face to Evie's, then finally settled on Nora. Pale, defiant, trembling. He saw the dampness in her eyes, the slight tremor in her fingers, the faded sunflower pattern on her apron, the broken ceramic at her feet, and the wall behind her covered in children's crayon drawings. He stepped forward, over the broken shards, into the apartment. His men stayed outside, pulling the doors shut behind them. Nora. Her name came out of him broken, ravaged. Nora stepped back until her spine hit the dining table. Both children pressed against her legs, that EJ gripping her apron. Evie clutching her thigh and hiding her face. Ethan looked at them. The mother shielding the children sheltering behind her. A tight circle of protection, and suddenly, everything clicked. You were pregnant with twins. He said that it wasn't a question. Nora turned her face away. Tears slid down her profile, but she didn't wipe them. When she spoke, her voice shook, but every word was deliberate. That I signed the divorce papers. I walked away. The agreement said the kids are mine. Ethan watched her, how she kept her chin up, even while crying. How her voice cracked, but never broke. That he stepped closer. One more stride brought him directly in front of her. He placed his hands on her trembling shoulders and lowered his forehead until it nearly touched hers. Nora. His voice shattered against her skin. Why didn't you tell me? She finally looked up at him. Tears blurred her vision, but she could still see the raw pain in his eyes, the same thing she'd been carrying for 5 years. That I was told. She whispered, her voice scraping out of her throat. Told you said you didn't want me. Ethan's eyes reddened. He pulled her into his chest, locking his arms around her like she was a sandcastle about to collapse. Nora's fists pressed against his chest, slowly uncurled. She clutched his shirt front instead, buried her face in his shoulder, and the sob that tore out of her sounded like a dam breaking after years of pressure. EJ stood beside them, looking up. The practiced composure on his small face finally softened into something more childlike. He tugged his sister's hand and whispered, Evie. It worked. Evie peeked around her brother's shoulder. She watched her crying mother and the man holding her. And then she took a tiny step forward, her chubby hand catching the fabric of Ethan's trousers. Ethan felt the small pull and looked down. Evie stared up at him, tear tracks still on her cheeks, but her lips were already curving upward in a tentative smile. Daddy, she said again, a little louder this time, soft and warm, like a baby animal testing its first step into the light. Ethan kept one arm around Nora as he crouched down with the other. He reached out, slowly, gently, and rested his palm on Evie's head. Her hair was silky and warm beneath his fingers, fragile as a dream. His throat worked. He forced the word out. Yet Evie's face lit up. She let go of his trousers, scurried back to her brother, and stood on tiptoe to whisper in his ear. EJ's lips curved slightly, that all-knowing smile of his. He looked at Ethan, then at Nora still sobbing in his arms, and stepped forward. His small hand patted Ethan's shoulder. Don't let Mom cry, he said. Ethan looked up at his son, this little boy with eyes so much like his own, and a maturity that spoke of too many early mornings. He pressed his hand to the back of EJ's head. A gentle touch. You were here all along. I was 5 years late. Okay, he said, his voice dropping. I won't. The broken shards of the bowl stayed on the floor. The children's drawings on the wall glowed under the warm light. A sun, a house, 3 stick figures holding hands. Ethan held Nora. EJ stood at his side. Evie's small fingers stayed clenched on his pant leg. Outside, his security team quietly closed the door, leaving them to their chaos. Ethan looked down at Nora, her sobs finally quieting. Then he looked at the 2 children watching him with upturned faces. Everything from the last 5 years to the cold marriage, the ruthless divorce, the 3 years he'd spent searching and coming up empty. All of it converged in this cramped, cluttered living room. Like light through a prism. He dropped to one knee, lowering himself to their level point, one hand on EJ's small shoulder, the other gently cupped around Evie's head. He looked up at Nora. Nora, he said, let's go home. Nora stared down at him, this man who commanded boardrooms, who made entire companies tremble, who no one dared speak over. And there he was, kneeling in her tiny apartment, one arm around each child, looking up at her with his whole heart in his eyes. Come home with me. Her tears spilled again, but she smiled and nodded. Later that night, Nora tucked the children into bed. EJ and Evie squeezed onto the small mattress, covers pulled to their chins. Their eyes gleamed from under the blanket like twin flashlights. EJ held his sister's hand in his, but before closing his eyes, he looked toward the doorway where Ethan stood. You're not leaving tonight, right? His tone was careful, almost a challenge masked as a statement. Ethan gave a single nod. EJ closed his eyes. Satisfied, Nora slipped out of the children's room, pulling the door shut behind her. The living room fell silent. The broken ceramic had already been cleaned up by Ethan's men. 2 glasses of water sat on the coffee table, long gone cold. Nora settled into a worn armchair, wrapping her arms around herself. Ethan sat across from her, knees almost touching hers. He'd removed his suit jacket, rolled his sleeves to his forearms. He looked more settled than he had 5 years ago, but the way he looked at her was the same, deep and quiet, like a wave held in check. When did you leave? He asked. The day I signed. Nora stared at her fingers. I got on a plane that afternoon. I didn't tell anyone. Ethan's fingers tightened against his knees. I searched for you for 3 years. Nora's lashes flickered. She met his eyes. You searched every city I traveled to for business. I checked the local preschool registries. No matching names. No records. No leads. His voice was level, like he was presenting a quarterly report, but the roughness beneath gave him away. I thought you'd left the country. I didn't go far. Nora's voice steadied. Just a few hours away. I rented a small place. Picked up freelance translation work. For 2 years. It was just me and the twins. After Evie kept getting sick, I hired a part-time nanny. Ethan studied her. She was thinner, her chin sharper than before, but there was a resilience in her eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago. He remembered the day she'd sat in his office. Divorce papers in hand, her fingers white-knuckled around the pages. He'd had a transatlantic conference call. He'd scribbled his name, told his assistant to handle it, and walked out. When he came back, she was gone. You were pregnant then, he said quietly. How far along? Nora was silent for a few seconds. Then she reached beside the sofa and pulled out an old photo album. She opened it to the first page and handed it to him. Ethan looked down. An ultrasound, dated 1 month before their divorce. Twins. 10 weeks. I went to my appointment that morning. Nora's voice was barely above a whisper. I was going to tell you. But do you remember what you said to me that day? Ethan's hand stilled on the album. He closed his eyes. He remembered a phone call. His assistant saying, Ms. Mitchell is waiting. He'd been buried in an acquisition crisis. He'd waved her off. Tell her to wait. I'm busy. Then his secretary had come in. He hadn't listened to the full message. Just said, tell her we'll stick with the agreement. You sent word. Nora said slowly. That Mr. Carter said he didn't want it. To handle it per the agreement. Ethan's head snapped up. His lips parted. But no defense came. He just stared at her. An ache lodged in his throat. I never said that. His voice was barely audible. The acquisition deal. The contract I was working on. It had a clause for handling side agreements. I told my secretary to tell you to go home and rest. Nora stared at him, uncomprehending. All those years the wound she'd carried at the very center of her chest. The belief that he hadn't wanted her. Hadn't wanted their baby. It cracked open. She felt something crumble inside her. Then you were gone. Ethan closed the album, but held on to it. His thumb tracing the edges of the ultrasound photo. When I came back, you were gone. The signed papers were on the desk. I went to your parents' place. They said you'd moved. Nora turned to the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered, moths circling the amber glow. She took a deep breath, pressing down the swell of emotion. It's in the past. It's not in the past. Ethan rose, rounding the coffee table to crouch in front of her. He reached for her hands, gathered them in his. They were cold, evidence of years spent carrying 2 children alone. He wrapped his warmth around them. Looking up at her profile, Nora, I looked for you for 3 years. Every week, I checked a new city's preschool lists, but without a last name or birth date. I hit dead ends. A beat. I thought you'd terminated the pregnancy. Nora finally turned to look at him. Her eyes shimmered, but she held them in. So you kept searching? Yes. He looked at her. The cheap ceiling lamp cast uneven shadows across his face. He squeezed her hands, his voice hoarse but final. Because you were my wife. Even after the papers. I didn't agree. Nora's tears broke free at last. She looked down at this man, kneeling at her feet, refusing to release her hands. In the dark hours of so many nights, taking temperatures, giving medicine, rocking feverish children, she'd imagined this reunion. She'd imagined coldness, distance, the same indifference as the man who'd walked away 5 years ago. She'd never imagined him kneeling, holding on, saying, I didn't agree. From behind EJ's door, a sliver of light widened. 2 small heads stacked one above the other. Evie had her hand clamped over her own mouth to stifle a giggle. EJ observed the scene in the living room with calm, measured assessment. His father crouched in front of his crying mother. A small, satisfied smile crossed his face. He eased the door closed and led his sister back to bed. Evie, is Daddy saying sorry? She whispered. EJ pulled the covers over both of them and stared at the ceiling. Probably. He paused, his smile growing. It's going better than I expected. Evie didn't understand what he meant, but she saw his smile and copied it. She curled against his arm and mumbled something about Daddy making breakfast, then drifted off. EJ stayed awake. In the dark, he listened to the muffled voices in the living room. The occasional sob. He was 5 years old. He'd known, almost from the beginning, that the word daddy was forbidden in their house. Every time he asked, his mother's shoulders would stiffen. She'd say, "He's in a faraway place." And then she'd turn away, busy with something else that he'd learned not to ask. He'd also learned to look. Last week, he'd used his mother's tablet, searched a name, found the Carter Holdings corporate site. It had taken him 3 days. A children's coding app and a surprising amount of trial and error to break past their firewall. He'd only wanted to see what his father looked like. He'd found his parents' wedding photo, locked in an encrypted file. Now he'd found his father. Next step, make him stay. He glanced at Evie, already asleep, her lips still curved in a dream smile. He patted her back gently, smiling to himself. In the living room, Nora had finally cried herself out. She slumped back into the armchair. Ethan sat on the floor beside her, his shoulder braced against her knees. Neither spoke. Outside, a cat yowled. A distant car horn sounded. Nora felt Ethan drape his jacket over her. She didn't open her eyes. "I'll make breakfast tomorrow," he said from below her. "What do EJ and Evie like?" Her lips curved. Without opening her eyes, she answered, "EJ likes fried eggs. Runny yolk. Evie likes wonton soup." A pause. "Okay, I'll learn." Nora cracked one eyelid. Ethan was still on the floor, back against her knees. Phone screen lit up. He was Googling how to make a runny egg. She watched him. The concentration on his face, like he was negotiating $1 billion deal. And yet he sat on the floor of her cramped apartment, searching for egg tutorials. She pulled his jacket tighter around herself. It smelled like him. Clean, crisp. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in 5 years, she felt like the nightmare was truly over. The moonlight slipped from behind a cloud, flooding the small living room with soft silver light. For people. 2 in the next room. 2 in this one. Breathed in rhythm, waiting for morning. Morning would bring eggs and wontons. Morning would bring a first breakfast with their father at the same table. Morning would bring a beginning that was 5 years too late. Chapter 2. Nora woke to the sound of clattering in the kitchen, still groggy. She slipped on her jacket and padded out. Ethan stood in her tiny galley kitchen, her sunflower apron tied around his waist, spatula in hand, locked in combat with a frying pan. 3 failed eggs sat on the counter. A 4th was sizzling, the white slightly charred at the edges, the yolk holding a precarious wobble. Evie had dragged a little stool to the kitchen doorway, chin propped on her hands, watching her father cook with unabashed adoration. Periodically, she'd cheer, "Wow, Daddy, so good." EJ stood beside her, a cookbook open in his hands, reading the steps aloud with clinical precision. "Turn the heat down. You had it too high." Ethan adjusted the burner, his concentration never wavering. When he finally slid the 4th egg onto a plate, Evie clapped. EJ observed, "Better than the first 3." Ethan looked down at the egg. Crispy edges, round yolk. And his lips tilted upward. A tea breakfast. Evie slurped soup with greasy cheeks. EJ cut the burnt edges off his egg with surgical precision. Nora and Ethan sat across from each other, their children between them like a busy wall of chatter. Ethan's bowl held plain porridge. All the eggs had gone to Evie, and most of the soup to EJ. Nora quietly transferred her own egg onto his plate. Ethan looked up. She wasn't looking at him, just eating her own food. But when he bit into that egg, a faint smile tugged at his mouth. Near the end of the meal, EJ put down his utensils. He wiped his mouth deliberately, then looked at Ethan. "Daddy, your house is big, right?" Ethan set down his bowl. "You want to see it?" EJ didn't answer. He turned to look at his mother instead. The question was in his dark eyes. "Mom, you coming?" Evie put down her spoon too, grabbing Nora's sleeve. "Mom, let's go. I want to see Daddy's house." Nora looked at her 2 children, their bright, hopeful faces. Then at Ethan across the table. He wasn't saying anything, but his fingers tightened slightly around his coffee mug. A small tell, exposing how much he wanted this. She exhaled. "Finish eating. We'll get ready." Evie cheered, scrambling off her chair to find a dress. EJ finished his egg with methodical calm, then went to help his sister choose socks. At the table, only Ethan and Nora remained. Nora began gathering dishes. Ethan reached for them at the same time. Their fingers brushed. "EJ told me something last night," he said, voice low, as he rinsed the plates. Every birthday, he wished for a father. And when Evie was 3, running a high fever, She called out my name. Nora's hand stilled. She watched Ethan's back. His shoulders slightly tense as he worked. You know that now? She said that he told me last night. After you went to bed that he shut off the faucet and turned to face her. His sleeve was soaked. He didn't seem to care. EJ. A small pause. He talks like me. Evie's personality is more like yours that you've known them one day. One day is enough. Blood knows. Nora didn't answer. She turned to wipe the counter. But Ethan stepped beside her, gently taking the towel from her hands. She looked up. He was right there. His hand paused beside her, then withdrew. Controlled. When she glanced at his ears, they were pink in the morning light. The Carter family car pulled up in front of the mansion. Evie pressed her face to the window, mouth forming a perfect O. EJ sat beside her, doing his best to keep his cool, but his eyes kept counting the stories of the house. Ethan opened Nora's door. She paused at the familiar wrought iron gate, the same one she'd walked out of 5 years ago. Crying. Now she stood here, with 2 chattering children and a man who'd cleared his entire weekend for them. She turned the page on that old chapter and stepped inside. Mr. Chun, the butler, was waiting. He recognized Nora immediately. A flicker of surprise quickly masked. Welcome home, Mrs. Carter. Nora felt her ears burn at the title. Before she could correct him, Evie was already running inside, asking if he was the butler like in the movies. Mr. Chun crouched to her level, his old face softening. I'm Mr. Chun, miss. You want anything? You let me know. Ethan watched from the entryway. His golden retriever trotted over to inspect EJ, tail wagging. Mr. Chun was already chatting with Evie, and Nora. She was standing in the living room, staring at a framed photograph on the wall, their wedding picture. The only one they'd ever taken together. It was still there, frame polished. She turned to look at him. Ethan came to stand beside her. I never took it down. Nora studied the image. She looked nervous in it. He looked stiff, but the corner of his mouth was lifted. They'd only been married a month. She'd thought things were going to be okay, and then everything unraveled. She left. He kept the photograph. EJ. Evie. Ethan straightened, calling the children over from where they were patting the golden retriever. Come see your rooms. The guest suite on the 2nd floor had been converted. Twin beds. One blue, one pink. On each, a stuffed animal, a bear, a rabbit, just like the ones the children had described as their favorites. Evie threw herself onto the pink bed, clutching the rabbit. EJ stood by the blue bed, running a hand over the comforter. Before looking up at Ethan, Daddy, Ethan crouched down. Yeah, you prepared this. It wasn't a question. Ethan nodded. EJ looked at him. He didn't say thank you. Instead, he stepped forward and wrapped his small arms around Ethan's neck. A quick, fierce kiss on the cheek. Then he pulled back immediately, busying himself with his backpack. Ethan stayed crouched, ears bright red, smile unstoppable, from the doorway. Nora watched, eyes prickling. She turned away, pretending to study the wall art. When Evie's voice piped up, Mom, look, my bunny blinks. She turned back and found Ethan already standing, looking at her, quiet, steady, 100 unspoken words in his gaze. She pretended not to see. Walking over to fix Evie's bedding. That night, Ethan had an emergency video call. Acquisition talks. He retreated to his study. Nora gave the children baths and read them a story. The door was left cracked. She sat in the hallway on a small stool, scrolling her phone, hearing Ethan's voice from down the hall. Sharp, cold, entirely the CEO she used to know. A complete contrast to the man who'd burned 3 eggs that morning. The study door opened. Ethan stepped out, saw her on the stool, and his entire demeanor softened. He sat beside her, close, without hesitation. EJ and Evie asleep. Yeah. She rotated her phone absently. They passed out right after the story. A beat. The egg you made today. EJ said it was good. He cut off the burnt parts first. Though Nora laughed. He still ate it. That kid's picky. Finishing it is practically a compliment. Ethan watched her laugh. In the hallway's low light, her face was soft and warm. She looked younger like this. More like the woman he remembered. Nora. Yeah, that photograph. I looked at it every morning before leaving, so I wouldn't forget what your smile looked like. Nora's fingers tightened on her phone. She didn't look up, but her voice came back, lighter than she felt. Well, now you can see it in person. It comes with 2 extra smile lines. Ethan leaned in, studying her face with exaggerated seriousness. She pushed his cheek away, laughing. Stop staring. No smile lines. You're wrong. He said. You look exactly the same. Her ears burned. I'm going to close the windows, she announced, and escaped toward the children's room. Ethan stayed on the stool, watching her retreat. Her steps were just a little too fast. He smiled. 5 years ago, when she'd left, he'd sat in their empty bedroom, staring at that photograph, thinking she'd chosen to leave him. He hadn't even given her a proper goodbye. Now she was back. 2 children, sitting in his hallway, telling him his egg was passable. He stayed on the stool for a long time, long after the children's lights went dark. Finally, he stood and paused at the door to their room. Through the crack, he saw Evie sprawled on her stomach, face buried in the rabbit. EJ lay on his side, one hand protectively over his sister's back. Ethan closed the door gently, went to his study, stared at a blank file for 20 minutes. Then he picked up his phone. Ethan, I'll make breakfast again tomorrow. I've got the egg technique down now. He waited. Nora, don't you have work tomorrow, Ethan? It's the weekend. Family time isn't skipping work. He watched the 3 dots appear, disappear, reappear. Finally, a single response. Ethan stared at that ellipsis, smiling. He set the phone down, turning to the window. The garden glowed with quiet, tidy lights. The mansion he'd lived in for 5 years was suddenly full of noise. Children's laughter, scattered books, a second toothbrush in the bathroom. He looked at the acquisition file on his desk, numbers blurring. All he saw was Evie's face and EJ's small kiss. He closed the file, turned off the light. He passed the children's room again, paused, heard their breathing. Small, steady. He stood there for a long time. Chapter 3. On the 3rd day at the Carter mansion, EJ got sick. Nora and Evie were in the living room building blocks. EJ sat on the sofa reading a picture book. Then, without warning, he closed the book, curled into a ball, and pressed his face into his knees. Nora was across the room in an instant. His forehead was hot. Her stomach dropped. Thermometer read 101.3. EJ's cheeks were flushed. His normally sharp eyes were glassy and half-lidded. Nora carried him to bed, gave him children's ibuprofen, laid a cold compress on his forehead. She didn't stop moving. Ethan had planned to be home, but a last-minute emergency pulled him to the office. Nora sent a text. EJ has a fever. Don't rush. I've got it. She sat beside the bed and held EJ's hand. By evening, the fever peaked. EJ was murmuring in his sleep. Mom, don't go. Nora gathered him in her arms and hummed the lullaby she'd sung 1,000 times. Evie sat at the foot of the bed, clutching her bunny, tears in her eyes. Mommy, is EJ gonna be okay? Nora kissed her forehead. He just needs rest. He'll be fine. At 8 p.m., Ethan burst through the door. He didn't even take off his coat, just sprinted up the stairs and into the children's room. There was Nora, propped against the headboard, EJ cradled in one arm, Evie asleep on her lap, all 3 of them on a single small mattress. Nora put a finger to her lips. Ethan's steps quieted. He crossed to the bed, checked EJ's forehead, still warm, but lower than before. Fever broke a little. She whispered. He ate something and fell asleep. Have you had dinner? Ethan looked at her, holding both children. No room for herself. He shook his head. Not hungry. There's leftovers in the kitchen. He didn't move. He took off his coat, draped it over the chair, and sat on the edge of the bed. Nora's eyelids were heavy, but she wouldn't let go of EJ's hand. Ethan reached over and gently extracted it from her grip. She looked at him, startled. Sleep? He said quietly. She hesitated. Then she let go, leaned back, and closed her eyes. At 18 midnight. EJ spiked again. Restless, feverish. Ethan didn't leave. He sat on the small stool beside the bed, replacing compresses, offering water, monitoring the thermometer. Nora stirred once, tried to take over. He pressed her back into the pillows. You sleep. I've got this. She watched him in the dim light. Focused, careful, his movements gentle. She didn't argue. She drifted, half asleep, but still aware of his presence. Each time he checked EJ's forehead, his hand lingered. By dawn, EJ's temperature had finally broken. He opened his eyes to find Ethan sitting beside the bed, one hand loosely holding his small fingers, the other propping his head as he dozed. A shadow of stubble darkened his jaw. His collar was wrinkled, one lock of hair defiantly sticking up. EJ watched him for a long moment. Then he moved his small fingers. Ethan woke instantly. His eyes found EJ's, and his voice scraped out, rough with fatigue. You awake? How do you feel? EJ shook his head. His throat was dry. Daddy, you didn't sleep. I slept a little. Ethan helped him sit up, held a cup of water. EJ drank, leaned back on the pillow, and studied his father's tired face. Then he reached out and touched the stubble on his jaw. Ethan blinked. Rough. EJ observed. He pulled his hand back, but his lips curved. You should shave. Ethan's lips curved, 2. He pressed his palm to EJ's head. Yeah. Nora appeared in the doorway with a bowl of congee. She stopped. The morning light caught father and son. EJ propped against the pillows. Ethan on the stool beside him, both wearing the same small smile. She leaned against the doorframe, watching. EJ spotted her. Mom. Porridge. She came forward, set the bowl on the nightstand, and pressed a palm to EJ's forehead. Finally, the fever had broken. She let out a long breath and, without thinking, smoothed down Ethan's wild hair. Ethan looked up at her. Her hand was still on his head. In the morning light, their eyes met. Nora looked away first. She handed EJ the porridge. Drink it yourself. It's hot. She turned and left the room. As she passed Ethan, she said, very quietly, eat something. You were up all night. Ethan looked at the small hand he'd been holding all night. EJ sat upright, blowing on his porridge. He gave Ethan a knowing look. Go sleep. Daddy. I'm not tired. You have circles. EJ pointed at his own under eye. Worse than when I'm sick. Ethan laughed out a low, surprised sound. He stood, ruffled EJ's hair, and headed for the door. The threshold. He paused and looked back. EJ was drinking his porridge. Nora had leaned in from the hallway to wipe a grain of rice from his cheek. Morning light poured through the window, pooling around all three of them. Ethan stood in the hallway, touching his jaw where EJ's small fingers had pressed. He could still feel that small, lingering pressure. Ethan slept through the morning. When he came downstairs, EJ. Fever broken and alert. Was sitting on the living room floor, building a Lego castle with Evie. Ethan watched their heads bent together, then crossed to the sofa. Nora came out with a fruit tray, glanced at him. Did you sleep? Yeah. He took the tray and set it on the coffee table. EJ carefully locked a blue brick into place. His profile, as he concentrated, was a mirror of Ethan's childhood photos. Nora sat beside Ethan, voice low. EJ called for you in his sleep last night. Ethan turned. When he gets fevers, he always calls for you. Nora picked up an apple, began peeling it. He's never asked me about you directly, but I knew he was curious. Ethan watched EJ's small back. 5 years old, already learning not to ask. Instead, he'd broken past a corporate firewall just to see his father's face. And then he'd brought everyone home. Nora. Her knife paused. What did you do? When he called for me. The knife stilled. The apple peel spiraled down in a long, unbroken curl. I held him. She said quietly. Told him you were busy. That you'd come back when you could. Ethan reached over, covering her knife hand with his. The knife stopped. The peel broke. Nora didn't pull away. She didn't lift her head. She placed the peeled apple on the tray, her fingers curling slightly beneath his palm. You don't have to say that anymore. Ethan said. I'm here. Nora looked up. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she pulled her hand away, picked up the fruit tray, and carried it to the coffee table where the children were building. But Ethan saw her brush her eyes with her sleeve as she turned away. EJ looked up at her red-rimmed eyes, then at his father on the sofa. He returned to his Legos, but a small smile flickered across his face. Evie passed him a blue brick. EJ, what are you smiling about? EJ took the brick. Nothing. Build your castle. I in the kitchen. Nora cut the apple into slices. She heard EJ's calm directions and Ethan's low voice. That one goes on the left. She leaned against the counter, looking at the apple juice on her fingers, and smiled. Outside, a spring rain began to fall, washing the new leaves to a brighter green. The Carter mansion, for the first time in years, was full of sound on a rainy day. Children's laughter, a man's footsteps, and the quiet snick-snick of a woman cutting fruit. The rain seemed to wash away something old and heavy, something that had been pressing down for 5 years. Nora carried the sliced apples back to the living room. She found EJ settled on Ethan's lap, eating apples and directing his sister's building. Ethan had one arm loosely around him, the other examining a puzzle piece. When he bent his head to discuss color choices with EJ, his nose nearly brushed his son's hair. Nora watched for 2 seconds. Then she crossed to the sofa and curled up on the armrest, reaching for an apple slice, sweet, crisp. Outside, the rain kept falling. She tucked her legs up, looking at 3 people from behind. 1 tall, 2 small, hunched over scattered blocks and bricks. She felt as if the last 5 years were dissolving in the spring rain. Ethan glanced at her. She was curled on the armrest, eating an apple, hair loose, face easy. He returned to handing EJ pieces. EJ tipped his head up. Daddy, your ears are red. Ethan shot him a look. EJ gave him a yeah. I see everything. Look back. Evie had no idea, happily banging a block like a drum. Nora. curled on the armrest. Saw it all. She bit into her apple and smiled. She said nothing. Chapter for the annual Carter Holdings anniversary gala was, historically, a cutthroat affair. Last year, Ethan had spent exactly 5 minutes on stage, barely cracked a smile, and left. This year was different. This year, the PR department received a direct instruction from the CEO. 2 children's formal outfits. A navy tuxedo for a boy, a pink dress for a girl. The PR director stared at the message 3 times. Then she printed it and framed it. Gala night. Ethan escorted Nora and the children through a side entrance. EJ wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, matching bow tie, polished shoes. His face was set in a serious, I am a young executive expression. Evie wore a pink tulle dress, her pigtails adorned with tiny pearl clips. She refused to be put down, clung to Ethan's neck, and peered around the ballroom with enormous curiosity. Nora wore a champagne silk gown, her hair swept up in a simple twist, pearl studs in her ears. Ethan kept one hand on the small of her back. Cameras flashed. Guests whispered. She felt exposed, but his palm was steady and warm. Ethan led them to the main stage. He wasn't reading from a teleprompter. He introduced them. Nora froze. The crowd went silent. Tonight, I'd like to introduce my family. He looked at Nora, then at the guests. My wife, Nora. My son, EJ. My daughter, Evie. Pandemonium. Camera shudders like gunfire. The applause nearly lifted the roof. Ethan paused, letting it settle. Then he continued reading his prepared remarks. No one listened. Everyone was pointing phones at the CEO's daughter, her small hand patting his face. Daddy, hurry up, Evie said. Mid-speech, Ethan glanced down, smiled, and finished the rest without missing a beat. Backstage screens lit up with live comments that Ethan Carter has a daughter. The little boy is his mirror image. He smiled. That was a smile. I saw it. Obsessed with girl dad energy, Nora watched from the wings. On the live stream, Ethan was crouched, reading Evie's untied sash. His fingers were clumsy. EJ stood beside him, directing. Pull the left one first. A boardroom titan. A 5-year-old. A botched bow. Broadcast to millions. Nora's phone exploded. Texts piled in from friends, family, former colleagues. Nora, why didn't you tell us the kid's father was Ethan Carter? She silenced her phone and tucked it into her clutch. Ethan came off stage with Evie asleep on his shoulder, drooling slightly. EJ held his father's jacket hem, clearing a path through the crowd. A 5-year-old bodyguard, Nora, met them backstage. Ethan carried the sleeping girl, held EJ's hand, and navigated the glittering chaos with a blank expression. But he angled his body to shield the children from the crush. A few board members openly stared. The PR director rushed over with a phone. On it, a trending hashtag. Hashtag Ethan Carter Girl Dad. With a 9-photo gallery. Him tying her shoe, bending to listen to her, carrying his son down the steps. Top comment. So Ethan Carter doesn't have a frozen face. He just doesn't like you. Ethan glanced at the screen. Leave it. What about interviews? Ignore them. He had already turned, arm around Nora, steering them to the lounge. In the green room, Nora laid Evie on the sofa and tucked a blanket around her. EJ slid down from his father's arms, went to his sister, and patted her back with practiced gentleness. Nora looked at the two of them on the sofa, then at Ethan. You're going to be all over the news tomorrow. He handed her a glass of water. You're in them. So, because you're their mother, and everyone's going to know you're Mrs. Carter. Nora glared at him over the glass, but her eyes had no heat. She took a sip, and his hand settled against her lower back. The room was quiet except for Evie's occasional sleepy murmur. Outside, the gala hummed. Another world. Nora thought of the night she'd left. Also a Carter gala. She'd sat in a green room like this for 3 hours, clutching an ultrasound, waiting for him, and then she'd gotten a message. He said to handle it per the agreement. That night, she'd sat in that room, freezing. Tonight, in this room, his hand was warm on her back. 2 children sleeping on the sofa. The noise outside. She didn't feel cold anymore. Ethan. She turned to look at him. He looked down. If you're on the news tomorrow, she said, make sure you blur the kids' faces. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Okay. Her ears went pink. She turned away, pretending to straighten Evie's blanket. EJ cracked one eye open, saw them, closed it again. That small, knowing smile returned. Later that night, Nora scrolled through the online frenzy. One photo in particular caught her. A side-angle shot of Ethan leaning down, listening to Evie. His expression was soft, eyes downcast, a tiny smile on his lips. Comments flooded the post. Is that really Ethan Carter? He has a soft side after all. Family goals. Imagine being loved by Ethan Carter. Nora pressed the phone to her chest, staring at the ceiling, smiling. Next to her, Ethan's phone buzzed. Probably the PR team. She glanced over. He was half reclining against the headboard, scrolling. Read it, yeah? He locked the screen. They want me to make a statement tomorrow. What are you going to say? Ethan pulled her over, tucking her against his chest. His voice was rough with sleep. For words. Personal. Not. Up. For. Discussion. Nora laughed softly against his chest. They lay there, in the quiet, listening to the children's breathing through the wall. A breeze stirred the curtains. A sliver of moonlight touched the duvet. Just before sleep pulled her under. She heard him whisper, even if they take down the stories tomorrow, I'll make sure the whole world knows eventually. Nora didn't answer. She just squeezed his hand. The next morning, the news cycle had moved on. But for Nora, the warmth of that green room was locked away somewhere she'd never lose. Chapter 5. The wedding announcement and the twins' photos trended for 2 full days. But inside the Carter household, the quiet had its own weight. Nora's phone stayed on silent. She focused on settling the children. But something was building beneath the surface, something she hadn't fully acknowledged. That night, Nora had a dream. She was back in that empty green room, clutching the ultrasound, waiting. The secretary's cold voice. Mr. Carter said he doesn't want it. Handle it per the agreement. She woke with a gasp, heart hammering. The clock read 2:17 a.m. Quiet. Children sleeping. She slipped out of bed, wrapped a robe around herself, and stepped onto the balcony. The night air was cool. The garden below glowed in the moonlight. Footsteps. A jacket settled over her shoulders. Still warm. Ethan's arms came around her. His chin rested on her shoulder. Bad dream. His voice was low, roughened by sleep. She turned slightly, looking at him. His hair was mussed. His pajama collar hung open. He'd come after her without hesitation. She opened her mouth, and couldn't speak. The dream was still lodged in her throat. She just nodded. Ethan turned her to face him. The moonlight was bright enough to show the wetness in her eyes. His hand tipped her chin up. Gently. You've been wanting to talk about it, he said, right? Nora looked away. Yes. She'd been thinking about it since the day she returned. For 5 years. She'd survived on the conviction that he hadn't wanted her, hadn't wanted their child. And then he'd said, I never said that. And the wall she'd built her life around had cracked. Then why did you sign? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. You didn't want to. Why didn't you stop me? Ethan's throat moved. He looked at her under the moonlight, silent. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I didn't read the terms. My assistant summarized them. Ms. Mitchell agrees to leave with nothing. Custody of the child goes to her. He paused. I thought you were leaving me. I came to see you that morning. Nora's voice broke. I waited 3 hours. And your secretary came out and said you didn't want it. Handle it per the agreement. I never said that. Ethan's grip on her shoulders tightened. That day. I was finalizing an acquisition contract. It had a clause called agreement procedures. My assistant heard me say handle it per the agreement and thought it was about the divorce. She left out 3 words when she passed you the message. Nora's tears spilled over. She stood there, under the moonlight, crying silently. All the nights she'd stayed up with sick children. All the translation work she'd done in the dark hours. All the times she'd told her parents, I'm fine. All of it collapsed into one simple truth. He had never stopped wanting her. 3 words. Lost in 5 years of absence. Nora. He pulled her into his chest, arms tight. I searched for 3 years. I thought you'd taken the children and vanished because you didn't want to be found. 3 months after you left, I pulled the call logs, heard the miscommunication, but you were already gone. Nora pressed her face into his shirt, soaking the fabric. His heart beat steady under her ear. She fisted his lapel, voice muffled. Why didn't you tell me the first night? Because you were crying so hard. He kissed her forehead. I thought it would be worse if I told you then. Nora sniffled. Her sobs quieted, dissolving into ragged breaths. She pulled back, looking at his red-rimmed eyes, his tight mouth. She wiped her own face, then wiped his. Ethan caught her hand, pressed his lips to her fingertips. Warm, deliberate. Nora, his eyes held the moonlight. From now on, I'll tell you everything myself. No messages, no second-hand words. Her nose burned, but she held the tears back. She rose on her toes, pressed her lips to his. Very, very softly. The night wind stirred her robe. For a moment, he went entirely still. Then she pulled back, ears pink, face turned toward the garden. Okay, let's go to bed. I have to drive EJ to school tomorrow. Ethan stayed where he was, touching his own lips. A slow smile formed that he didn't say anything, just pulled her back against his chest. They stood together, arms intertwined. Their shadows on the glass door merged into one from EJ's window. A sliver of curtain was drawn aside. Two heads stacked. Evie's hand was over her mouth. EJ calmly watched his parents embraced. He tugged his sister back to bed. Sleep, he said. Evie let herself be tucked back in. EJ, is Daddy saying sorry? Something like that. Is Mom going to be happy tomorrow? EJ looked at his sister's small face in the moonlight. He smiled. Yet he pulled the covers higher over her feet. Outside, his parents were still standing on the balcony. The moonlight stretched their shadows long. EJ closed his eyes. His mental checklist ticked forward. Next item, make sure they never separate again. That might be harder, but with Evie's help, and given how much his father clearly wanted to stay, probably not impossible. He smiled into his pillow and fell asleep. Chapter 6. The spring open house at the children's preschool was a standard affair. Parents came in, toured the classrooms, participated in crafts. Ethan had cleared his morning. He and Nora arrived together. Walking into the preschool with Ethan Carter was like walking in with a spotlight. Parents turned, whispers rippled, but Nora had larger concerns that Evie's teacher, Mr. Brooks, was young, energetic, and far too familiar. He bounced over while Evie proudly displayed her clay rabbit. Evie's mom. That activity plan you sent. Loved it. Let's talk details soon. Maybe over coffee. Nora nodded. Sure. I'm around on weekends. Mr. Brooks beamed, patted her shoulder. Great. I'll treat you to. A hand slid around Nora's waist, drawing her aside. Ethan had materialized out of nowhere. His arm was a possessive line. His face was calm. His eyes said, remove your hand. Now. Mr. Brooks. Polite. Clipped. Weekends are family time. She'll have to pass. The teacher's smile flickered. He recognized Ethan. Who didn't? After last week's headlines. He coughed. Sorry. I didn't know. We can reschedule. No need. Ethan's voice was measured. My wife is busy with the children. Use the class group chat for school matters. Mr. Brooks retreated. Nora, still tucked into his arm, looked up at him. Her ears were bright. You don't have to. He was just. I know. Ethan looked down. Didn't like it. He was being friendly. Friendly doesn't require a shoulder touch. She was about to argue. A small voice cut in. Daddy's right. They both looked down. EJ stood at their feet, paper boat in hand, face entirely serious. He touched her hand last week. 2 seconds. I counted. Nora crouched. EJ, when the hallway, when you were turning in forms. He shook her hand and didn't let go. EJ paused, glanced at Mr. Brooks across the playground, then lowered his voice. I don't like him. Evie trotted over. Mom, I don't like him either. He hugged me and wrinkled my dress. Ethan's expression shifted. He crouched to Evie's level. He hugged you, just a little. Evie demonstrated. He said I was cute, but my dress got wrinkled. She tugged at her hem, emphasizing the real issue. Ethan stood, phone in hand. He looked at Nora. Get Evie something easier to move in. That dress is. It was 5 figures. Ethan said flatly. From Mr. Chun. It wrinkled. Nora stared at him. Evie's everyday dress. Hundreds. Apparently. EJ, unfazed. So, Daddy, if he touches Mom again, can we file a claim? Ethan looked at his son. A small smile curved his lips. Yes. Nora looked between them and burst out laughing. She scooped EJ up, grabbed Evie's hand. Okay, that's enough. We're heading to the sandbox. Ethan took EJ from her arms. EJ didn't object, just went pink around the ears and settled against his father's shoulder. Nora walked behind them. Phone out, snapping a picture. Ethan, head tilted toward his son. Small smile. EJ's hand on his shoulder. Their outlines gilded with afternoon light. She made it her wallpaper. Mom, you're lagging. Evie called. Nora pocketed her phone and caught up. The sandbox was a hive of activity. Evie kicked off her shoes and started on a castle. EJ sat beside his father, discussing optimal sand-to-water ratios. Ethan's sleeves were rolled to his elbows. His fingers were gritty. A group of parents had their phones out. But he didn't notice. He was listening intently to Evie's at another scoop directive. Nora settled on a bench, watched at Ethan's shadow, and the children's shadows merged. EJ poured sand into his father's palm. Ethan passed it to Evie's castle wall. Evie clapped. Daddy, you're the best. Nora took another picture. She looked at the screen. Ethan grinning. Sand under his nails. Entirely absorbed in his children. and added it to her folder, a folder that existed for less than a month. Already more than 100 photos. In the car on the way home. Evie was asleep on Ethan's lap. EJ stared out the window. Nora watched from the passenger seat. Ethan, one hand on the wheel, one resting on Evie's back. Ethan. You're kind of cute when you're jealous. He glanced at her in the rear view. You're provoking me. I'm just stating facts that I know you won't run. His voice dropped. Still don't want anyone else touching you. Nora's ears reddened. She looked away. Out the window. The glass reflected her own ridiculous smile. Ethan saw it in the rear view. Smiled. BJ, eyes closed. Also saw it. His small smile flickered. His report was complete. Next time, he'd be ready to report again. That he mentally added an extra cookie to Evie's share. Chapter 7. Saturday. Ethan was home. The four of them sat at the breakfast table. EJ was dissecting his egg. Evie was fishing dates out of her porridge. Nora was peeling eggs for the children. EJ set down his knife. Daddy, why weren't you with us before? The table went quiet. Nora's hand stopped. She looked at EJ. He was calm, focused on his egg, like he'd asked what the weather was like outside. Evie looked up too. Ethan put down his chopsticks. He met EJ's question with equal gravity. Because Mommy and I got some messages wrong. It wasn't that I didn't want to be with you. I didn't know where you were. EJ looked up. But you looked for us, yes, for 3 years. I checked every city. But your mom kept your birth records off the system. I couldn't find you. Nora's ears went pink. She deliberately avoided every registry. Filed the twins under a friend's name. A safety measure she'd never explained. EJ was quiet. Then, so you were always looking? Yes. Then next time you travel for work, can Evie and I come? His face was still controlled, but his ears gave him away. Red. Just like Ethan's. Ethan pressed a hand to EJ's head. Yes. From now on. Evie raised her hand. Me too. I want to fly on the airplane. You will. Ethan wiped a grain of rice from her cheek. Nora looked down at her bowl. She spoke quietly. When you were searching. Where did you go? Ethan turned. Preschools. Every city. Alphabetical order. Then the next city. How many? A pause. 32. Nora's hand tightened on her chopsticks. 32 cities. Search after search, that almost guaranteed to fail. He'd done it 32 times, just in case. Her eyes stung. She stood abruptly. I need to check the kettle. In the kitchen. She gripped the counter. Eyes closed. His footsteps followed. Ethan stood beside her. Took the kettle. Filled it. Every time I came back. He said. Voice even. I'd stand outside your old building. Hoping the lights would be on. Nora's tears slipped free. He didn't turn. Just poured 2 cups of water. Added dried dates. And handed her one. His fingers closed around hers. They will be from now on. She said. Voice rough. He looked down at her. A small smile. He pressed his thumb to her knuckles. In the living room. Evie laughed. EJ was correcting her block placement. Afternoon. Ethan took them all to a children's play center. Evie dove into the ball pit. EJ headed for the climbing wall. Ethan followed, scrambling up behind his son. Knees dusty, sleeves askew. The other parents stared. Evie screamed down a slide. Daddy, catch me. He caught her. Then he scooped up EJ too. One child on each shoulder. Nora, watching from a bench, shook her head. He looked ridiculous and happy in hers. Later, in the car, Evie slept. EJ fought sleep. Ethan drove, watching the road. Nora, in the passenger seat. When you were looking. What did you think you'd say to me? If you found me. Long silence. A red light. He turned. Evening traffic. City lights refracted in the car. I thought about it a lot. His voice was soft. First, I wanted to know why you left. Then. Were you okay? Then, pause. I used to picture you at a preschool gate, holding a small hand. Nora watched his profile. What did the child look like? Couldn't picture it. Sometimes like you. Sometimes like me. He started driving again. Turns out I got both. Nora turned to the window. Her reflection smiled. She adjusted the rear view. In the back, the twins were asleep. Evie's face smeared with candy. EJ's hand on hers. She leaned back. Closed her eyes. Ethan. Yeah. Next time you go somewhere. Call every day. Okay. Bring souvenirs. Books for EJ. Toys for Evie. Okay. What will you bring me? At the next red light. He turned. His lips curved. His voice dropped. Myself. Nora's ears burned. She pretended to pick at her nails. Her smile gave her away. In the back. EJ stirred. He'd caught just enough of the conversation. His smile flickered. Half-formed. Satisfied. His assessment. Daddy scored maximum points. Got Mom's ears pink for 3 seconds. +5. He went back to sleep. The car pulled through the Carter gates. Mr. Chin waited. Golden Retriever wagged. Nora carried Evie. Ethan carried EJ. Under the warm courtyard lights, they walked to the front door. Inside, firelight flickered. A half-finished castle on the sofa. Nora laid Evie down. Straightened. Turned. Ethan was at the entry, helping EJ off with his shoes. Firelight caught his profile. She crossed the room. Took his hand. He looked down. Didn't ask. Just laced his fingers through hers. EJ finished with his shoes. Looked up. His parents were standing together, hands linked. He walked over and slid his small hand into Nora's other one. Nora looked down. EJ, face serious. Evie's asleep. I'll hold her share. She laughed, leaned down and kissed his forehead. EJ's ears went pink, but he squeezed her fingers harder. Ethan looked at them. His son, his wife. And pulled EJ into his side. The three of them formed a small, tight circle in the warm entry light. Nora glanced at Ethan, then at EJ, and leaned to whisper something in EJ's ear. He stared at her for a second. And then grinned. Wide and unguarded. Ethan frowned. What did she say? Nora straightened. Not telling. EJ. Mom says we're going to the beach next weekend. Can you come, Daddy? Ethan looked at them. Two matching impish smiles. He kissed Nora's forehead, then EJ's head. Yes, from now on, I can. Chapter 8. The beach trip was postponed. Ethan had to fly out for a 3-day business trip. Before he left, he video called. Evie hugged the tablet, demanding to know when he'd return. EJ calmly requested 2 souvenirs. At least, Ethan smiled. Then his eyes found Nora over the children's heads. Nora. She leaned in. On the screen, his face was framed by hotel windows and her living room light. Wait for me, he said. The call ended. Nora stared at the blank screen for a moment. EJ tugged her sleeve. 3 days later, Ethan returned. He walked in at dusk, rolling a suitcase, 2 bulging paper bags in hand. Evie screamed and launched herself at him. EJ walked over more slowly, and Ethan gathered him in too. Nora watched from the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a towel, smiling. After dinner, Ethan doled out souvenirs. Evie got a deluxe art set with her favorite cartoon rabbit. EJ got a heavy, full-color astronomy encyclopedia. They retreated to study their treasures. Ethan reached into his inner jacket, a slim velvet box. He crossed to Nora, who was tidying plates. She looked up. Blue velvet, longer than a ring box. She opened it. Inside, a platinum chain, a pendant shaped like a tiny lock, engraved on the inside. May 17th, the day they'd reunited. Nora looked at him. He stepped behind her, fastened it around her neck. His fingers brushed her nape. She shivered. Cold. He shook his head. The pendant settled against her collarbone. She touched it. Ethan came around, took her hands. One more souvenir. She waited. He just held her hands tighter. From the next room, the children's voices drifted. Firelight crackled. Tomorrow, he said. Come with me somewhere. She nodded. Sunday. He drove her to the Ferris wheel at the city amusement park. The wheel was closed to the public. A staff member nodded them past the gate. Nora looked back. Evie and EJ were at the fence. Mr. Chin beside them, waving. Her heart accelerated. The gondola rose. The city spread beneath them. At the peak, the wheel stopped. Ethan dropped to one knee. He took out a small velvet box. Inside, a new ring. Inside the band. It's never too late. That he knelt. City lights blazing below him. 5 years ago. I didn't do this right. His voice was steady. I signed papers and walked away. I thought I'd lost you, but I kept searching. A pause. And you held on to our children. You gave me another chance. Nora's eyes filled. Nora. I didn't say it right the first time. His voice dropped. When I married you, I meant it. When I searched, I meant it. Now that you're back, I'll say it properly. He slid the ring onto her finger. Marry me. She nodded, crying, laughing. Ethan, get up. He stood. She grabbed his collar and kissed him. Below, Evie jumped. What are they doing? EJ, holding his astronomy book, smiled. Something important. He looked up at the lit gondola, frozen at the sky's peak. His checklist was complete. The rest was no longer his job. The gondola descended. Nora broke the kiss, touching the ring. When did you plan this? Before I left. The inscription. It's what I told you. Which part? He touched his forehead to hers. It's never too late. You came back. I caught up. She pulled him close. The gondola touched ground. Evie burst in. Nora lifted her. EJ walked up to Ethan, looked at the new ring on Nora's finger, and gave a small nod of approval. Then he took Ethan's hand. Your plan worked, Daddy. Ethan looked at his son's knowing expression. He lifted him. You had a plan too. EJ leaned in, whispering, mine worked before yours. It worked the day you showed up. Ethan carried him out. Nora held Evie's hand. The evening light painted their shadows long. Evie hopped on her own shadow. EJ, on Ethan's shoulder, watched his mother laugh. I in the car. Nora studied her ring. Evie sang nursery rhymes. EJ read his astronomy book. Nora turned to Ethan. Next time you travel, bring them. He smiled in the rear view. Okay, me too. She added. He glanced over. She was studying her ring, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her. A red light. He reached over and laced his fingers with hers. EJ, watching from the back, raised his book to hide his face, but his smile escaped through the pages. The car turned through the wrought iron gates. Dusk painted the sky amber. Nora pressed Ethan's hand to her cheek, closed her eyes. He drove slow, wanting the evening to last, wanting this whole, full family to stay suspended in the warm light a little longer. Mr. Chun waited at the door. He saw the car pull in, full of evening glow and laughter, and turned to the household staff behind him. Mission accomplished, he said, smiling. The young masters finally keeping them. Chapter 9. The wedding was set for late spring. Ethan didn't play it quiet. One post on social media. May 20th. A new beginning. Photo. For silhouettes on the Ferris wheel, Nora. Him. Two small figures in front. The PR department's workload tripled. Ethan ignored every request for comment. He had two requirements for the planner. EJ and Evie as flower children. He would write his own vows. A week before the wedding, EJ and Evie rehearsed. EJ, in navy suit and white rose boutonniere, practiced scattering petals with precision. Evie, in matching mini dress and flower crown, wobbled on new shoes. Nora watched them on the living room floor. Evie kept stopping to pick up fallen petals. EJ restaged his route with relentless focus. Ethan came out, watched, then walked over, lifted Evie, and carried her to the end of the hallway. Just walk to me. Evie, if you get tired, I'll come get you. Evie kissed his cheek. You're the best, Daddy. EJ glanced at her privilege, then returned to his petals. But his lips curved. Wedding day. Clear skies. The garden behind the Carter mansion was transformed. White roses and ivory ribbons. Guests filled the aisle. Nora, in the dressing room, touched her veil. A knock. EJ and Evie appeared in the doorway, hands clasped. Evie's dress had a tiny white rose at the hem. EJ's boutonniere matched. Nora knelt and pulled them both close. You two are walking me down the aisle. No falling. EJ nodded. I won't fall. Evie nodded. Me neither. But if I do, Daddy will carry me. Nora laughed. Stood. Took their hands. The garden doors opened. Sunlight poured in. Music swelled. Ethan stood at the arbor. Black tux. White rose at his lapel. He saw them point. One tall, two small. And his smile reached its end. They walked toward him. EJ scattered petals. Evie wobbled, but kept going. Nora's veil lifted in the breeze. When they reached him, EJ completed his mission and stepped aside. Evie looked up at her father. Daddy, she announced. We brought Mom. Ethan touched her head. Then he looked at Nora, extended his hand. She placed hers in his. He held tight, like he was reeling in something he dropped 5 years ago. The crowd quieted. Ethan reached inside his jacket, pulled out a folded page. Then put it away. Too long, he said. I'll say what I mean. Pause. The garden held its breath. 5 years ago, I lost someone I should never have let go. For 5 years, I wondered if I'd answered that phone differently, if I'd read that document before I signed it. He stopped, but I realized, 5 years ago, I didn't deserve her yet. These 5 years that she raised our children. She raised herself. She's stronger than she was when she needed me. Someone sniffled in the crowd. Oh, the wedding 5 years ago doesn't count. His voice softened. This one does. He looked at her. From today on, you're not someone I lost. You're someone I found. Nora's tears broke free. She rose up and kissed him. Quick, fierce, in front of everyone. Then pulled back. Ears red. I accept. Applause. Cheers. Evie clapped. EJ held up the ring box. Evie held Nora's bouquet. Flawless execution. After the rings, Ethan pulled out his discarded notes again. Thank you, he said, voice even, to my children, for bringing their mother home. Nora knelt to hug them. Ethan crouched, all 4 of them, under the white rose arbor. In a tangle of fabric and tears, Mr. Chun cried openly in the front row. The golden retriever padded down the aisle and sat watching them at the reception. EJ and Evie were passed around relatives. Evie accepted candy from everyone. EJ answered polite questions with practiced calm. Nora, watching from across the room, leaned to Ethan. Evie's social skills are better than yours, Ethan. Watching his daughter in a gray tant's arms. She takes after you. Nora glared at him. Her ears went red. Late that night, the children were asleep. Nora sat in the hallway. Ethan found her. Ethan, yeah, that speech. There was a part you didn't read. He sat beside her. In the dim light, his face was soft. I wrote. He said, that I'm grateful you raised them. They're incredible. And you're more incredible. Nora leaned her head on his shoulder. The night breeze smelled of white roses. I'm glad you found us, she said. His arm tightened around her. Then he stood and lifted her. She yelped. What are you doing? Wedding night. One more tradition. That he carried her to the bedroom. Laid her down. Touched his forehead to hers. From now on, he said, you're not allowed to run. She pulled him down. Kissed him. Running's pointless. She whispered. Your kids would just find me again. He laughed. Soft. Unguarded. In the dark. Through the wall. EJ stirred. His cheek pressed to his pillow. He smiled. The task was complete. The scorecard locked. Outside, the white roses bloomed under the moonlight. Their fragrance drifted through the windows, through the hallway, through the nursery, the whole house. In a quiet silver haze, breathed together,